Así que chavales, para empezar, os quiero enseñar un vídeo que creo que os va a gustar mucho, que es de un canal que hace como exploración de los mapas de los videojuegos para encontrar secretos. Yo creo que a través de este canal descubrí un secreto de Metal Gear Solid 4, que ya os lo mostraré cuando juguemos, que es de una sala del acto 1 del Oriente Medio, que pensaba que tendría algo, y ese canal me enseñó que efectivamente no había nada, pero había como un rincón raro. Entonces, vamos a ver, porque ha sacado un vídeo recorriendo los mapas y los secretos de Metal Gear Solid 3, así que lo vamos a ver en directo ahora y reaccionamos a ver si descubrimos algo pues que no sabíamos, ¿vale? De Snake Eater. Exacto, el que hackea los juegos para mover la cámara. Se llama Sesez. Vamos a verlo y a ver si encontramos algún secreto nuevo. Mirad, chavales, ese está el canal, ¿vale? Dejadle ahí un comentario o algo cuando lo veamos, que vamos de parte de Power Games y que le vea que le apoyamos, ¿vale? Porque el canal no hace mucho contenido, obviamente, de Metal Gear, es de diferentes juegos, pero el de Metal Gear también puede molar mucho. Vamos a verlo y reaccionamos a ver qué se cuenta el colega Sesez con los secretos de Metal Gear Solid 3.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want to try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. And today is, in fact, one of my favorite games. It is Metal Gear Solid 3 on the PlayStation 2. This camera is provided by @Withering Rooms. They're working on their own video game, so if you follow them, it would probably mean a lot to them. It means a lot to me that they made this camera for us today, because now I can look at Metal Gear Solid 3 from any conceivable angle, and, well, I won't...
Va literalmente a romper el juego.
Spoil anything right away here in the intro, but I think at this point we should probably move on to the good stuff, and I do like to start with the good stuff, so let's jump into it.
Toda la sierra ahí, desde lejos.
So the first thing that I wanted to show you guys is something that's really freaking cool. Honestly, I thought for sure this was in the game somewhere, but it's not. This is a animation that's completely unused. If you look at this scene...
Una animación de Eva al final de Metal Gear Solid 3 que no se ha usado en el juego. A ver.
At the end of the game, where Eva's talking about where she's duped Snake and she's sneaking out and stuff like that, there is an animation where she uses the unused door in this cabin and basically walks out. Now, the animation of her actually opening the door isn't quite right. She just kind of is like adjacent to the door and the door stays closed. But still, the obvious intention is there. She was supposed to use this room that never opens.
Vale, que hacía como que salía por la puerta, pero realmente no había esa acción en la puerta, ¿no?
Speaking of which, what is inside that room? Well, there is some stuff. I just wish that it was more exciting than what it actually is, but there is a foot rug as well as a ceiling light that dangles from the ceiling. So clearly at some point this door was supposed to open and that Eva was supposed to open it. But that never happened. Again, for the lower third, and I'll just show this clip again in case I already showed it, there's the original clip that shows you what happens during this exact time marker for this cutscene. And speaking of which, there are two rooms in this cabin that get completely unexplored. So here's the other one with an...
Una sala que nunca se ha visto. A ver esto.
Open door. So looking around here, you can see that there isn't too much else to this room, but I just wanted to dispel any mystery behind it because, I mean, everybody looks at a room and they probably think to themselves, what could possibly be over there? Well, now we know. And moving on from there, we're going to talk about the end. Now, the end...
Poquita cosa, ¿no? Una silla ahí en una sala, un poco para rellenar el escenario, pero poco más. Y cuando se abre la puerta, que realmente no se abre la puerta porque está fuera de cámaras.
end does have something kind of cool going on. He also has an unused animation, but sadly, Metal Gear Solid 3 is a pretty tight ship that doesn't have a whole lot out of bounds. I definitely showed you what I think is like the coolest thing a second ago, but because it's a tight ship, there's another unused animation here with the end, but you actually lose his character model, but his shadow that is projecting what the model should be doing in this exact space ends up showing you exactly what you're supposed to be looking at. There was a little bit of extra animation at the end where the end was supposed to go limp. And who knows, maybe that was his original death animation, but they decided to really ramp it up and kind of make it honestly a little bit goofy. A little bit of extra.
Vale, eso es que cuando se muere Dien, lo que estaba proyectado era que le diera como un tembleque ahí y ya se muriera del todo, ¿no? Pero al final no lo incluyeron.
Unused animation here, we can see Eva crawling through the crawl space. And again, although her character model completely disappears, and I feel like if there was a way to turn off all this culling for these character models, we would find a lot more out of bounds, but that's besides the point. Here you can see the biker helmet showing us where she would be going if we could see the entire character model. She goes out quite
Ah, mira, se escapa con el casco puesto ya.
a ways and crawls through the building itself, being a little boundary breaker herself, I guess. And the next one is a
se escapa, solamente sale el casco. Aprovechan que está fuera del plano para no tener tantos recursos ahí gestionándose.
request, and as always, you can follow me on my socials if you ever want to reach out and tell me what you want to see in the next episode. But for here, we got Snake, and a lot of viewers want to know if his eyeball actually exists underneath the eye patch. Now, I was
si existe el ojo debajo del parche. A ver, a ver.
a little bit surprised by this because in the cutscene where he loses his eye, he loses his eye. But the player model where you go around the game is a lot different. See, taking the camera inside here, despite the fact that he had that eye patch, will show you that he does in fact have his other eye. Now the other thing too that I just want to point out is that you might see a sharp object inside a snake. That's just an arrow that for whatever reason I can't scoop it out with a knife anymore. It's glitched inside of his body and I had to do it for the rest of the run. Now
ya tenía la mecánica del delta, que se queden los daños en el modelo de personaje durante toda la partida. Solo que se glitcheaban las flechas dentro del cuerpo. Que luego no lo veías en el menú de curas, pero bueno, ahí parece que sí que se ha glitcheado.
In this picture, you might remember Naked Snake holding this picture of Rykov. Well, I gotta ask you, where do you think he is when he's holding this picture? Would you ever guessed outside and sort of like floating in the air right above a fence? Because what the hell? Why on earth would you do that? And then I want to give you a close.
Se ve que han puesto simplemente ese escenario para que Snake vea la foto con un fondo gris y han usado literalmente cualquier textura.
Would you ever guessed outside and sort of like floating in the air right above a fence? Because what the hell? Why on earth would you do that? And then I wanted to give you a close-up look at the Philosopher's Legacy because there are images, for whatever reason, on this little thing here. And it also...
Uy, qué interesante. Eso es lo que se puede ver dentro del legado de los filósofos. Es curioso esto, ¿no? A ver qué es lo que sale. Son como códigos aquí como de QR, ¿no? Códigos de barras y demás.
Seems to be rather undefinable stuff. I think the one on the lower right-hand side is a satellite dish, and the upper left-hand image may be an eyeball that's...
Una antena parabólica y un globo ocular. Hay que tener un poco de imaginación, ¿no?
Sort of squished down, like sort of compressed. But the rest of it just look like they're little barcodes. I think a lot of people want to know what happens if you move the camera around during the Guy Savage minigame. And
uy, romper la cámara del Guy Savage, de la pesadilla de Metal Gear Solid 3. A ver qué hay.
Answer, sadly, is that it doesn't work. But it removes the filter that makes it black and white, or sepia tone, whatever you want to call it. And you get to see the colors of the character.
¡Oh! Nunca había visto esto. Los colores reales del Guy Savage, sin el filtro sepia. ¡Wow! ¡Qué curioso! Nunca había visto esto, chavales. ¡Qué curioso! Cambia completamente la visión que tenía del juego, ¿eh?
But it also removes a couple of key features from the character, like his hair. So I guess we get to see underneath his hair, and we also get to see the color of his coat and stuff like that. There is a video that just has a whole showcase of what this demo minigame looks like without the image filter.
Y los enemigos, ¿no? Cambia completamente. Qué curioso esto. Me ha encantado saberlo. Mirad, chavales, cómo se veía con el filtro. Bueno, le quita el pelo, ha comentado. también, al quitar el filtro. Hay un par de errores por ahí, pero bueno. Ahí vemos el abrigo, que es de color azul, algo que yo no tenía ni idea. ¡Wow! ¡Qué curioso! Y parece un personaje como del Devil May Cry, ¿no? ¿No parece como un personaje secundario del Devil May Cry? Algo así. Esa vestimenta. Es que tampoco se apreciaba muy bien con el filtro ese sepia, ¿eh? Yo es que odio los filtros sepia. Odio el filtro sepia. En cualquier cosa. Eso cuando dijeron del Delta que tenían los filtros opcionales, dije, no me interesa nada, lo más mínimo. Los filtros. Me gusta ver los colores puros, siempre. Saturados incluso.
Removes a couple of key features from the character, like his hair. So I guess we get to see underneath his hair, and we also get.
Claro, iba a ser un hack and slash, entonces la inspiración podría haber estado ahí, sí, en Devil May Cry. Así con las correas, ¿no? Las cadenas y eso.
To see the color of his coat and stuff like that. There is a video that just has a whole showcase of what this
curioso,
demo mini game looks like without the image filter. So if you want to see what it looks like in full color of all the enemies and stuff, I can leave a link to that in the video.
Oye, pues qué guay ver los colores de ese minijuego. Nunca pensé que sería posible,
Description down below. And then there's the famous ladder. You know the one where it plays Snake Eater while you're climbing it. And I wanted to do a zoom out to show you just how big the ladder is. I want to get the whole ladder in one shot. So in order to do that,
va a poner la escalera entera en un plano. Si hubiera salido, Frank tendría otro vídeo de la inspiración de Kojima. No. Va a haber inspiración de Kojima respecto a... Bueno, respecto a ese juego no, pero sí que va a tener involucrado ese juego. Y más pronto que tarde,
And also, I just want to put it out there that it is really fun to find.
Tengo un montón de vídeos de inspiración en proceso, pero un montón. Si te digo 7, 8.
Now that if Snake falls down the hole from which he climbed the ladder, he does fall all the way, but he does eventually stop, but not where you might think. He does not stop at the bottom of this pit. He goes beyond that, out of bounds, and then eventually stops in the void.
Bueno, tremendo ostión se mete Snake desde la escalera, ¿no?
And now it's time to have a whole lot of fun showing you what you can find if you go into first person mode. Now the first one is if Snake is crawling inside of like a tunnel or something like that, or in this case, a tree log. You can see that his legs still exist. No guard will ever suspect a pair of floating legs that can clip through boundaries. Trust me, I know. And yeah, if you look left and right, the legs just sort of swing in whatever direction you're going.
Como ahora el Kojima recursos,
Obviously, what you're supposed to see is just his hands, but taking the camera out will show you that his torso, neck, and head are all gone, but his legs and arms.
Como ahora el Kojima recursos. Si usas la torreta, te borra el torso y la cabeza y simplemente están visibles los brazos y las piernas.
Aren't, and when you move around the turret, oh boy, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of like being on a seesaw. Next up, we're going back to the end, and his eyes just kind of bug out of his head, doesn't it? Like, that's kind of like the weirdest trait of the end, I would say. And so, naturally, I took the camera inside his head.
El ojito se le ve a the end, Cómo me mola esto de ver ahí en la cámara cómo se ven los elementos ahí del personaje,
Going off his eyes, and honestly, the end has something completely unique about his eyes that I was not expecting at all. Especially if a character that bugs his eyes out like it does, I figured there'd be extra care and attention to how his eyeballs are. But in truth, he does the whole double eye side thing, and for whatever reason, the pupil and the iris of the eye are completely missing on the inside. So it goes all the way up to that point, and then you can just see inside the eyeball itself. And I will tell you this, I've looked through many eyeballs in my time on Boundary Break, lots of very interesting techniques that are used. This is definitely a different one from all the others I've ever looked at. Next
claro, como se ven solamente en la rejilla, ahí en la... Tienen que hacer como la recreación para que se adapte al modelo.
The Fury, and the Fury is really interesting in that there's a difference between his field model and his...
Soy el único que pensaba que lo que brillaba en The End era la calva y no la mira del francotirador. Oye, alguno pudiera pensarlo, así no pasa nada.
Cutscene model. If you take the camera inside of his suit when he's in the cutscene, we can see a...
Esto quiero ver yo, que me interesa, que quiero hacer la historia de The Fury, A ver qué dice de The Fury.
in his cutscene model. If we take the camera inside of his suit when he's in the cutscene, we can see a very detailed face with eyelashes, the whole...
Eso me da rabia, que hay una cara súper visible del personaje y en el juego prácticamente no se ve.
Whole shebang. You can even see that his eye color is blue. Speaking of taking the camera inside of things that we're not supposed to...
Bueno, tiene ojos azules de Fury, es lo que hemos descubierto en su modelo.
To get to the head, I was really surprised by this, and maybe I just never noticed, but if you take the camera inside of the plastic bag that is over Snake's head, you can see that there's a fully modeled naked Snake head that is inside of this thing. Now the hairs...
Vale, sí que había cabeza y cara de Snake dentro de la bolsa, dice.
Bit strange, and I'm really sorry that I can't get you a great look at this. But if we take the camera fully inside of the bag and inside the head as well, you can see all the details to his face and his eyeballs and everything. It's pretty much a snake head. Another thing I wanted to look at is what exactly is happening when characters are changing their outfit or whatever off screen. You see this a lot in earlier games, and surprisingly, you see less of it now in modern games. It's kind of cool how it's evolved like that. But with Eva here, yes, normally off screen she unzips the front of her jacket and then you get basically the iconic look of Eva. But here you can see it all in one shot, and you can really just see how the model just gets swapped out. There isn't a animation that is missing here that we could have seen. The same can be said when Snake
Cambia simplemente de un modelo a otro y ya está.
Takes off his Rykov mask, and now you can see the exact frame when the character model for Rykov is swapped in with the...
Claro, lo que hace simplemente es cambiar de un modelo a otro y lo saca del plano para que no se vea. No te va a hacer la animación completa para no usarla.
Snake model. And with that said, let's do a zoom out of one of the most iconic areas of the game, the bridge.
Selenoyarsk. Tómalo. El puente, icónico. Dijo David Hayter que había jugado el remake de Metal Gear Solid 3 hasta la parte del puente. Si le queréis creer, eso es lo que dijo él. Al Delta. Hasta el final de la misión virtuosa, vaya.
Alright, so now we're going back to the final log cabin room that again is very inaccessible. But I saw this image, this picture here on a shelf, and it kind of looks like Godzilla. Now, I know that Godzilla is...
¿Dónde? ¿Hay un Godzilla aquí, ha dicho? Qué interesante esto, a ver lo que puede haber en los cuadros, Porque está el cuadro de las mariposas, muy misteriosa siempre en la saga, que haré un vídeo de eso.
Referenced already in Metal Gear Solid 3, and I looked through all of the established images that are in the slide reel.
Míralo,
like any one of
míralo.
Them matched up
El Godzilla
well
tuvo
with
lanzando
this
rayos.
Image. And I could be wrong completely about what this even is. I mean, it's really tough to make out in general, but like still, I see Godzilla. Am I wrong? I know that they have the rights to Godzilla in this game, so I mean,
como lanza el rayo ahí por la boca, ¿no?
Ronan's office, which is only accessible during the cutscene. Otherwise, you're not really allowed to see what's inside this room. And what you see is what you get for the most part. But the one thing I did want to show you is that there's a private bathroom over here. And I want to take the camera inside there just to show you that there is a sink and a mirror, as well as some shelving.
Tiene que un váter, el granny, ¿no? Para cuando le pegue el apretón.
But there's also a space available for a toilet, and they just decided...
Godzilla vio todo, chavales, correcto, Benja. Godzilla vio todo lo que pasó en el encuentro final entre Eva y Snake. Todo.
Not to make one because obviously the player would never be able to see it. What's really cool too is that after the cutscene, if you take the camera through this door, you can see that there are elements of Granan's office still rendered, but most of it isn't. And with that said, let's do another zoom out of an outdoor area showing you just how richly detailed the world of Metal Gear Solid 3 is. It's really impressive for PlayStation 2. I just need to make that clear.
Es que es un juego de Play 2 esto, Mirad la profundidad del mapa, la
amplitud. For as many PlayStation 2 games as I have covered, the environmental detail, it's sort of like magic in Metal Gear Solid 3 because there's so much going on in any given zone, and yet it's staying stable. And now we're going to be talking about the fun nature of cutscenes and how they work in Metal Gear Solid 3. And for the most part, there's plenty of models and stuff like that that are stored while waiting for their turn to be put on screen. And when that happens...
Están ahí en la T-pose esperando que se active la cinemática, ¿no?
You can almost be rest assured that there will always be a version of themselves in a T-pose waiting for this to happen. This happens a lot with the guards and stuff. The guards are like thrown way outside the cutscene, and you can find them, if you're lucky, in a T-pose, usually clipping through the ground and stuff. But then there's key characters like the boss here. In fact, here's 2 versions of the boss, and what's really cool about this particular cutscene is that she's off camera talking, but even though that's the case, she's still in her T-pose, and her mouth moves to the dialogue, despite the fact that you wouldn't be able to see that. And here you can see the shadow of the end, which means that the character model is of course there, but just called out. And you can see that the shadow has a T-pose. And we can even look at the exact frame in which the end gets
Y de repente aparece, ¿eh?
During this brief cutscene with the Shagohod, you can see all these different engineers that are also in a T-pose. And there are many, many more instances that I'm just not
Están de reserva en el
Anyways,
banquillo,
towards the end of the game, when
esperando.
you're facing off against the Shagohod, Colonel Volgan has many scenes inside of the Shagohod. And although these scenes are incredibly brief, so it becomes really hard to get a good look at everything that's going on, the one thing I did want to show you guys is that if you pan the camera out, you can see that the interior shots of the Shagohod are actually stored well outside the boundaries, and it has its own rendering separate from the Shagohod vehicle itself. Anyways, with all that said, let's do a zoom out of the river of the...
Vaya, que no estaba modelado por dentro tal cual el Shagohod, sino que lo han hecho por fuera. Algo comprensible, ¿no?
Sorrow, and I'm picking this one in particular because it actually has a sky dome, which is kind of uncommon for this game.
Uy,
Now it's
ahí
time
no era cielo abierto con The Fear.
to show you some weird stuff that happens slightly out of bounds. Like, for example, these crocodiles. If you look at this crocodile, you can see his tail is buried underneath the ground and sort of has like some contortion that's a bit strange. Although you would technically be able to see this if you submerge yourself underwater during the scene with the Sorrow. Here you can see that the skeletal model for the Sorrow here at the very beginning of the game also has more details that you normally can't see, at least in this scene.
Uy. Ahí vemos la cartuchera, ¿no? Parece esto, una mochilita del de Sorrow. Y las gafas aquí, las gafas yo nunca me había dado cuenta que tenía gafas el modelo también del esqueleto. Tiene ahí las gafas, caídas.
And then there was another viewer
Para hacer más evidente que era de Sorrow, vaya.
request. They want to know what happens when Snake gets fully submerged underneath the quicksand. What happens to his character model? How deep does it go? Well, here's your answer. It's actually really not that far below the line of the quicksand.
Bueno.
And then when you're in the underground cave, I wanted to show you that the peaking of light that happens throughout this area are actually just giant glowing white squares, which is a really cool effect. But even more cool than that is that some of these areas that are just trying to bleed out light for you, like the end of this cave tunnel, is a massive orange box.
Le han metido ahí una caja amarilla. Sí, la mochilita, la cartuchera, esto, lo de donde se mete la pistola, la cartuchera se llama en España. La cartuchera, la pistolera.
In fact, there's some areas where the box containing the little biome to kind of lead you into the next area can be
Aquí le pilló cansado a Kojima ya, ¿eh? Metió la caja amarilla y dijo, a correr tú.
larger than the map itself. But now I want to move on to some of the bonus stuff that you normally have to like press R1 in order to even catch. And I want to show you what it looks like from another angle, like
Escena secreta es poner R1.
Ocelot's
A
little
ver.
pose here. This is what her expression actually looks like when she's doing the pose. So we can't see any hints of her mocking him in any sort of way outside of just the gesture itself. Also, taking the camera inside of Eva's head can show you that she has weird fangs underneath. It's not really fangs, it's just sort of geometry clipping. But this imagery here is just too good to pass up for my audience, so you're welcome. And then I wanted to show you the escape plane from Out of Bounds. Now, you could just barely see this in-game, but taking the camera over here can show you that the plane is fully modeled, despite the fact that the water and everything else that it's resting with is not.
Ahí estaba esperándole. Eva con el avión.
And then the very first area of the game, there's that beautiful view outside the cliff, and I wanted to show you how they pulled that off. A lot of it is just a giant flat texture, but there's a lot of tiny little low poly trees scattered all throughout this little area. It's really, really impressive. Yet again, I want to say for the PlayStation 2, when you consider the fact that the area itself also has a whole lot of trees, as well as a whole bunch of rocky terrain just to house all this stuff in. It's really, really impressive, especially when you think about all the little critters that are also walking around at any given time in Metal Gear Solid 3. Which that's something I'll show you too. Now,
Kojima realmente pensaría que alguien en algún milímetro se fijaría desde alguna esquina en si está el avión y lo puso para durante el duelo contra The Boss.
Normally you're able to see these creatures because you can collect them and they'll show up in your menu, but even in the game world itself, things like rats and birds, they all have incredible detail to them at any given time, which again lends itself so much to how impressive Metal Gear Solid 3 is as a game. A game with so much technical limitation than what we see in modern day.
Que cada animal, cada fruta tiene su modelo dentro del juego. Es una locura eso,
Yet somehow...
Yo siempre lo digo, en ese aspecto es superior Metal Gear Solid 3 a The Phantom Pain,
Some way, this is all existing, all in real time. Anyways, here's another little secret for you. If you went into the first person mode during this final cutscene, you can see Ocelot...
El final, en la oficina del presidente, a ver...
his gesture from outside the window, and if we take the camera and look at it from another angle, it's really interesting. Then I wanted to take a look at the graveyard and show you all the different tombstones. Now the tombstones actually reuse the same texture over and over again. I think there's only like a total of 2 different types of headstones. So the first one will say Beatrix J. Nekon. This next one's a little harder to make out, but I think it says like hero something with an L and then USD.
Uy, a ver, solo hay dos lápidas en el cementerio del final de Metal Gear Solid 3. A ver.
Esto
hay que investigarlo,
texture over and over again. I think there's only like a total of 2 different types of headstones. So the first one will say Beatrix J. Nekon.
Beatrix J. Nekon. ¿Qué significará eso? Le voy a apuntar. A ver qué puede significar eso. Nekon, con K, ¿no?
Nekon. This next one's a little harder to make out, but I think it says like...
Y la segunda que dice... Hero... Water ¿qué?
Something with an L and then USDDA watermark. And it says US Army underneath that. Then it has the birth and death date, Medal of Honor, DBC, SE and OLC, LM, BEM and OLC. And then inside of the...
Un poco raro eso, ¿no? No he encontrado el significado, así a simple vista. Lo de Beatrix me lo apunto, a ver si alguien se llama Beatrix del entorno de Kojima.
President's office. Wanted to show you that there is details that are really hard to see, like these little plaques that say history on them. Also doing a little bit of a tour around the office in case some of you want to get...
Una placa que dice historia.
Some of these details up close.
Fran, nunca entendí el cambio del cementerio del 3 y el 4. Lo miraré. Lo miraré.
And then after you blow up the Shagohod, at least you think you do, there's this exterior shot, and if you take the camera inside of the facility that houses the Shagohod, you will find one more of those units you had to explode in order to quote-unquote destroy the Shagohod. Here's something that's really, really surprising. In one of the earliest cutscenes of the game, the Fury is inside of the chopper, and if you look at him inside the chopper...
Ahí está el de Fury, Y sin el casco.
You could see his face without his helmet.
A ver, su cara sin casco.
Which is really shocking to me. And just for fun, I'm gonna let this scene play out.
No llega a aparecer ni de rebote, ¿no? De Fury en la secuencia de la misión virtuosa, ¿no?
With Snake fighting against Ocelot and his crew.
Pero que conste que estaba ahí, Que de Fury estaba ahí, en el helicóptero, aunque no se llega a ver. Qué curioso.
All from another angle.
Aparece pero muy poco. Cuando se llevan a Sokolov. Pero casi nada. Sí, llega a aparecer en un plano. Ahí de Fury. Pero sin casco llega a aparecer. Y de espaldas. Pensaba que no, ¿eh?
And now I'm gonna do a close-up of a leech, because why not? I've had this stuck on me the entire
Las
game, so
sanguijuelas.
here you go. Here's a leech that's stuck on my character model.
Ah, mírala, ahí está.
And then here's something that's
Asco.
really cool. This is great for all of you environmental artists out there. A lot of the effects that are pulled off in Metal Gear Solid 3 are done with transparency and then objects underneath. So for this scene, they wanted the metal grating to sort of have like a little bit of a sheen to it. And in order to pull that off, again, some of the metal grating is actually just transparent, and then underneath that are these textures here that end up peeking through the holes. And so, as a result, you get something that looks really impressive, when in fact, it's just some really simplistic tactics. The same happens in this facility's bathroom. If you look underneath here, you can see like all sorts of white lights. What's really weird about this one in particular, though, is that
Había que ser ingenioso realmente con las limitaciones de la Play 2, ¿eh?
you see literal ceiling light models underneath even that, which I guess is actually casting a real light above it, but I don't know how effective that actually is. Maybe it's sort of like in-game lighting the inside area here, because I don't really see it, but I guess that's probably what it's doing. And then in the sewer area here, there are some walls that, again, you would just think like, whatever, man, this is just a wall. But no, in order to get like this sheen effect on this wall that is supposedly being cast by this wall light, it's once again using the transparency effect. And on the other side of it is a big old dome that is creating that effect. Again, the developer's just going above and beyond in order to make this game world amazing. And then this is something I really wanted to show you guys. A lot of people want to know what it looks like.
Este hombre se dedica a romper las paredes de los juegos, y la gente que le pide la escena del masaje de Eva y Snake en la cueva.
Like when they have that scene when you're trying to get rid of the tracker.
Que se ven las sombras, pues ya sabemos que ni siquiera aparecen los modelos, ¿no? Solo están las sombras.
Snake, it's like it's supposed to be like a gag.
Bueno, ahí se ve, ¿no? El Snake ahí como le hacen daño, ¿no?
That you get rewarded with.
Cuando le quita ahí el transmisor.
If you keep the tracker on you this whole time, and everything's cast on a shadow. But if you take the camera over and you try to see what the character actors are actually doing, you'll find that there's actually another set of actors that are culled out, sadly. So we can't see what they're actually doing, but instead we can see what the real actors are doing this entire time, which is nothing like what's going on with the shadows. Anyways, if you're new here...
Las sombras se lo inventan, pero realmente no estaban haciendo nada raro, ¿eh? Había simplemente
so we can't
sombras.
see what they're actually doing, but instead we could see what the real actors are doing this.
Era de esperar, para ahorrar recursos, no para poner ahí una animación que luego solamente se vean las sombras. Era de esperar.
Entire time, which is nothing like what's going on with the shadows. Anyways, if you're new here, make sure you hit subscribe and check out.
Oye, pues muy bien, chavales. Este vídeo está muy guay, la verdad, me ha gustado mucho. Se le ocurra mucho. Seth se llama Bonder Break, que hace ruptura de paredes de videojuegos, así que darle apoyo al vídeo y meterse ahí y comentarle algo bonito, ¿vale? Dejarle el enlace en la descripción del clip cuando lo suba al canal secundario, ¿vale? Y hemos descubierto algo muy curioso para mí, lo que más, los colores originales del Wii Savage, del minijuego de Metal Gear Solid 3. Me llevo esa gran sorpresa de este vídeo, porque no tenía ni idea de que el abrigo era azul. Bastante curioso, y que me anima a investigar más sobre ese minijuego, la verdad. Veréis contenido pronto en el canal, ¿vale?